original rocker, your Earthwatch host, David Smith.
Hi. Oh, you are there, alive and well. Let me turn this ghetto blaster off. Ah, dear. It's a pretty noisy world at times, you know, and sometimes that noise can be a real problem. But Maxine discovered that the CSIRO is tackling the problem with some sound thinking.
If you live in a flat, the last thing you want to hear is what's going on next door, especially if your neighbours are having a good time and you're not. And if you live on a busy highway, who wants to hear the traffic when you're trying to sleep? Well, you can't turn down your neighbour's stereo or stop the traffic, but the research being done at the CSIRO can help. By testing different building materials, the CSIRO's Division of Building Research can find out which materials absorb sound to make a place quieter and which reflect it to make it noisier. This sound testing is done in 2 rooms, which work in very different ways. This room is called a reverberation chamber, which means all the sound in here is reflected off the walls, the floor and the ceiling and reverberates or echoes, which is why I sound so fuzzy. The walls, ceiling and floor in the reverberation chamber are made of cement, which is very hard and reflects sound, so the sound waves bounce off it and take a while to fade. The chamber has been specially set up so that sound will reflect in every direction. In here, the walls don't face each other at right angles as they would in a normal room, and that makes the sound bounce in all directions. And what about the white rectangular batons up there?
Right, they're called diffusers, and they are basically an extension of the wall. It's purely to make the sound field in there much more random.
And the revolving board?
Again, if you can imagine that revolving board as a light ball like you see in discos, imagine the light hits that, the sound hits it, voila, you've got the same effect. You've got sound scattered all over the room.
Why is it so important to have random sound?
The tests that we do require that sound hits the specimen at all possible angles. If it didn't, we would have to test each specimen at every possible, for sound hitting it at every possible angle.
That was pretty strange, wasn't it? It's like being in a room full of mirrors and seeing a picture of yourself reflected over and over again, except in this case, it's sound that's being reflected. The second sound testing room is completely different to the reverberation chamber. In fact, it's been called the quietest room in Australia. It looks like something out of Star Wars. This is the anechoic chamber, which is just the opposite to the reverberation chamber. In here, the sound doesn't reflect. It's absorbed by the foam padding on the walls. And there's heaps of it, 3.5 tons. So when you speak, there's no reverberation. Your voice goes flat. And like the reverberation chamber, underneath all this foam, the walls, floor and ceiling are facing at odd angles. There's even a special block of foam padding to fit over the door when it's closed, a kind of inside door. It's a strange-looking room, but it means scientists working here can set up what they call a free field.
Free field means that the best way of comparing it would be if you're in the country in an open field. If you said anything, made any noise, it wouldn't reflect back at you at all. It's just gone out into space.
And why is that so important?
Well, it enables one to measure the directional sound emissions from an object. In other words, if something's making a sound like a speaker, which is very directional, you can detect at what angle it's making the most sound because there is no reflection back.
So how do you test things in here?
Well, say we were testing a loudspeaker, we would have it rotating very slowly with a microphone next to it. And as the speaker faced the microphone, you would notice a very large increase in sound.
So you can tell from that certain things about the sound?
Yes, you can. You can tell at which direction the sound is coming from, how noisy it is, and in the case of perhaps a lawnmower, you can find out how noisy it will be for neighbours.
Good. And why do you need so much foam in here?
The more foam, basically, the more sound absorption you've got.
It's a really weird-looking room. What's it like working in here?
It's all right as long as the lights don't go off.
What happens then?
Well, you end up like me. No, perhaps not.
The CSIRO uses the information gathered in these sound testing rooms to work out what sort of building materials should be used in different situations. For instance, they can tell us how high to build a fence to keep out traffic noise, or how to cut down noise in school classrooms. They can even suggest ways of getting the best sound in a concert hall. And as the world becomes a noisier place, that kind of information is becoming more and more important.
Maxine and David are on the wing now with our creature feature.
Yes, thanks, Paul. Creature feature time indeed, and this is a very strange and mysterious creature. This animal, in various forms and disguises, has been the star of many, many movies.
And it has a blood-curdling cry.
Here's a strange clue. It's got wings, but no feathers.
And it's a fox that doesn't eat rabbits.
Anyone guess yet? No, not yet. No hands up, okay. It prefers to view... Oh, a few hands going up. It prefers to view the world upside down.
And this might give it away. It spends a lot of time hanging around in the dark.
Yes, you've guessed it. It is, in fact, the fruit bat. Yay! And there it is. Isn't it wonderful? It hasn't actually flown away either. Isn't it fantastic? Actually,
It's a bit smelly.
it's a bit, it has a typically fruit bat smell.
Why does
Yeah.
it smell so much?
Well, that is an interesting little story, actually. Fruit bats smell that way because it's sort of like a little accident of evolution, I suppose. They've been built with their bodies much the same as ours, but they have then evolved to hang upside down by their feet. And so, to put it in a nutshell, when they pee on themselves. And it all runs down their body, and it starts to smell after a while. Now, we reckon it smells pretty... ugh, but fruit bats think it smells great. In fact, they rub their tummies on branches and they climb around through trees and so on, and other fruit bats can come up and try and land there, and they go, oh no, that belongs to somebody else. I better land over here. So it's a very important thing for their social life to have this extraordinary pong.
Good for them. And do they only eat fruit?
They really eat fruit, and they also eat nectar from flowers. Usually they prefer native flowers like eucalypts and acacias, wattles and things like that. But they do also happen to like bananas like this and grapes. I'm going to feed this one. It might take a piece out of my finger because they also like fingers occasionally.
Do they suck your blood?
These ones don't. Oh, it's loving that grape. That was a lovely grape it's having there. We don't have any vampire bats in Australia. There's only vampire bats in South America. Have some more, little fruit bat. There you go.
Oh, he likes
lovely.
that.
Yeah, lovely. Look at that lovely face. Gorgeous.
How common are they, David?
They're extremely common, actually. They're very common right down the south of Australia and up as far as Papua New Guinea. So they're not endangered, which is nice, at the moment at least. I guess the only problem they really face is us clearing forests for timber and setting up farmlands and so on. They need a special sort of habitat, lots of bushy habitat, to have their nests and their camps. They live in what are called camps. Maybe thousands and thousands of these bats in a camp at one time. And they've got to have the right kind of trees to live there. So
Do they live in caves as well?
these ones don't, but many of our bats, of course, do live in caves. But these ones prefer to live in roosts in trees, yeah, in these huge camps. Fantastic. They're great flyers. Every time they take off at night to go and find the nearest fruit in the local orchard, you'll see thousands and thousands of them flying off across the sky. And the sky in Queensland can be dark with bats flying out at around 6 or 7 o'clock at night. It's just marvellous to see. And that blood-curdling cry they make, if you're camping up in Queensland too, I've actually been camping in a tent in Queensland, and the noise, it sounds like the cry of the Valkyries, a thousand vampires circling, and you're never quite sure what it is, but it's these fruit bats making their marvellous squawk.
Are they much of a pest for orchardists?
They're a pest for orchardists in the sense that they do sometimes eat some of the fruit, but it's not as big a problem as it's often made out to be, and I think the idea of shooting all the fruit bats is not really very sensible. we should let them, you know, have free rein and fly where they want to.
I read that in some countries they actually eat fruit bats.
Oh, that sounds a bit
They need
yuck.
lots of spices and condiments
To mask the
to
smell.
get rid of the foxy smell.
That's for sure, yeah, yeah. Okay. Well, look, I guess that's about all we've got time for Michael J. Flying Fox. Let's get him back to the zoo.
Yes, and speaking of zoos, let's take a look at this next story. It makes you wonder who's in the cage.
Zoos have changed. The zoo of the last century was a combination prison and amusement park, dominated by rows of cramped, heavily barred cages, containing an assortment of animals pacing up and down on stone or concrete floors. Many people in the community were concerned that animals were being exploited and sometimes treated very badly in those old-fashioned zoos, and so it's no surprise that the zoo of today is a very different place indeed. During the 1960s, biologists got together with zoo authorities and set about rethinking what zoos were all about. The result was clear. People come to zoos to see animals, to smell them, to study their behaviour, to watch the cycle of courtship, mating, birth and growth. In old-fashioned zoos, the people had the run of the place and the animals were kept restrained, often inside fairly cramped, small, well-barred cages. Well, of course, these days it's the reverse. The humans are kept inside the cage and the animals have got free roam in a lovely grassed area like this. And of course, with lions, it's very important to have good sturdy protection to keep you away from them. But for other kinds of animals, we can make use of what we know about their biology and do away with the bars altogether. Now, gibbons never swim. They hate water. So just by putting a moat around their island, we can keep the gibbons safe and have no bars at all. Seals like these Australian fur seals spend most of their life at sea. They're fantastic swimmers and absolutely at home in the water. So the zoo designers have gone to great pains to build an enclosure that gives us a fantastic seal's eye view of the world. Well, the great apes like Betsy the gorilla are highly intelligent, and their keeper, Uli Wire, spends long hours not just caring for their basic needs like a glass of milk before bed each night, but also sharing that most important of activities, play. Well, Uli, what's it like to look after these apes?
It's a very rewarding job to look after the primates, these big apes especially, because they're so sincere when you work with them. If they hate you, they let you know, and there's no backstabbing from them.
They become really close friends.
They become very close.
Playing with a gorilla sounds strange. I mean, they're so large and so strong. How do you play with a gorilla?
You tread very careful about it. You play very gently with them. If it becomes too boisterous, you tend to stop your play and let them ease off a bit.
Yes, yeah. Do they accept you as a friend, would you say?
They do after a while. It takes quite a long time to get accepted by the apes and the smaller primates, usually about 3 months before you can say they trust you to a certain degree.
How do you know when you're accepted as a friend?
You just can tell by their verbal expression, their facial expression. So you don't want to really change your appearance. They like to have their keepers wear the same thing, look the same thing, act in the same manner.
There's obviously a lot of care and attention goes into the design of successful enclosures. What factors come together to make an enclosure really work for both the public and for the animals?
Let me try and relate it to a painting. If you look at a brushstroke of a painting, it really means nothing. And if you talk about a zoo exhibit, out of context of what is surrounding it, it really doesn't mean very much. You have to look at the overall picture and get an image. And largely, a zoo exhibit comprises of all the things around it. The people, the space, the trees, the light, the vegetation, but also, of course, it involves things which are specific to the animals. If they jump, they have to have things to jump from. If they climb, they have to have trees. If they swim, they have to have water.
Yes.
And if they escape, you have to be able to constrain them. We put a lot of emphasis on the animals' needs, but we put as much emphasis on the theatre that we create. Wouldn't it be marvellous if we can afford it, and maybe in 20 years, 30 years, to recreate the Serengeti, to recreate the desert, to recreate the tundra, and have all the animals that live in those areas, the monkeys together with the predators and the birds and the reptiles, all living in an environment that will show people that the world is all very, very carefully interlinked one to the other.
This is the Hillsville Sanctuary. It's only an hour's drive from Melbourne, and as you can see, it's set in beautiful bushland. Hillsville is a very special kind of zoo. It's home to a wide range of native animals, and among its many claims to fame is one unique achievement. It was here at this creek in 1947 that platypus were bred for the first and only time in captivity. Graham, the sanctuary's changed over the years. How do you see it in terms of modern zoos?
Well, it's an interesting zoo because people use words like fauna park and native fauna park and sanctuary and so on, but it is a zoo, but it's a very special one with just the Australian native fauna in it. It looks different from a normal zoo because we don't have the need for the huge buildings, and we can make use of this beautiful bushland setting that you were talking about.
Yes.
It's certainly changed in the 50 years that it's been around. In fact, it's fair to say that only in the last 3 or 4 years has it, I think, really begun to take on the shape of a first-class major zoo.
Now, of course, looking at a place like this, it raises the basic question of why have zoos at all? What's your justification for having animals in captivity in a place like this?
I think it's because people want to learn more about animals than simply just gawk at them and look at them and say, hey, look, that one's different from that one. They really do want to learn more about their habits. They want to know about how they reproduce and how they feed and those things.
OK, but how do you answer critics who say that this is just a sort of prison farm for animals? There are people in the community who are concerned about that and perhaps like to close zoos down altogether. How do you answer those critics?
Well, of course, it's very difficult. Some people have very, very strong views against zoos. Some of those that I have met have strong views, have not been to a zoo. They certainly haven't been in the last 3 or 4 or 5, even 10 years to see how we've changed. They have a fixed idea of cages and concrete and so on.
Yes.
Now, it's very difficult to argue with someone who isn't prepared to come and look and to sit and talk. So I see Hillsville Sanctuary looking different in 20 years. I hope it is. I hope we've learnt more about animals and that we keep on designing it better and better and better for the animals, better and better for the public. We learn more and more. I'd like to be around in 20 years and just see how it does look in that time.
I guess I'd like to see it in 20 years' time too.
Me too.
Yeah. Actually, Graham Morris, the director of Hillsville Sanctuary, went through university with me, and his first job, he was the first education officer at Melbourne Zoo. And just to show you how zoos have changed, his first job was to try and figure out one little label to put under the name of each animal in its cage at the zoo. They had no information available at all at that time. And then you look what's happened to it now. I mean, the zoo's just changed completely. They've got one of the best education services in the world, and it's a very, very different place.
Amazing.
Yeah, let's hope it keeps on changing. I mean, just imagine that wonderful vision of the plains of Africa within the Melbourne Zoo.
Well, we go bush now in Worldwide.
This man is not on a bushwalk. He's on a search, looking for an ant's nest. And while it may not be your idea of a wild afternoon, American biologist Jim McIver has spent many hours watching and recording the behaviour of ants in these massive colonies. Scientists have long wondered how insects, such as ants, organise themselves into efficient working units. Which ant does what job and why? Jim is trying to answer some of these questions, and he's come up with a novel way of keeping track of individual ants.
Grab the ant by the legs and take a little Elmer's glue and put that glue right, a small amount of it, right on the abdomen of the ant. And take the numbered disc and glue it on.
In this way, Jim is able to follow the movements of the tagged ants and keep a record of their behaviour. The non-toxic glue and disc don't hurt the ants, although they may slightly hinder their antics.
It's not the conventional way of making electric wires, but the substance being made here will conduct electricity, and in a remarkable way. It's called a superconductor. It's made by grinding up powders and baking the result in a kiln at a high temperature. The black ceramic substance produced doesn't look much, but it has some unique properties. The secret of superconductors is they can carry a current of electricity without wasting any. There's no electrical resistance. Existing superconductors, used to make powerful magnets in hospital scanning machines, for example, have one major drawback. They have to be cooled to minus 269 degrees by liquid helium. That's very expensive. The new ceramic superconductors don't have to be nearly so cold. They will be much cheaper to use. These superconductors work at the temperature of liquid nitrogen, a mere minus 196 degrees. Pass a current through the ceramic at this temperature, and the meter shows there's no resistance to the current. If they can be made to carry a big enough current, superconductors could revolutionize the transmission of electricity from power stations, using underground cables instead of pylons. New and better computers should be possible, and trains which float on a magnetic field. Indian scientists now claim they've produced a superconductor which works at room temperature. It's not certain they have. Other scientists are checking the claims. There's more work to be done, but the revolution could be closer than ever.
And now it's back to our superstars, Maxine and furry friends with Earth Watching this week.
Hi, here's one of my furry friends. It's a baby wombat. And we've got some other cute and cuddly animals with us this week from a wildlife refuge at Berwick outside Melbourne. And here to talk with me about them is Claire Davis, who runs the refuge. Hi Claire, welcome to the show.
Maxine.
What have we got here? We've got 2 wombats.
2 baby wombats and a little kangaroo.
They're beautiful. And why you run the refuge? Why do we need refuges?
Well, unfortunately, because of modern civilization, we have cars that kill the mothers when the animals are walking across the road, and the babies are rescued, hopefully, by the people driving along the, the highways in the cars, and the children can tell their parents to get the babies out of the pouches, and then they're handed in to authority of some sort, and then they're passed on to people like myself, of which there are about 70 in Victoria. And unfortunately, the government departments don't have the time to look after them all, so they rely on us as volunteers to rear them and then put them back in the bush.
And these are only some of your animals. You've got more at home, haven't you? What have you got?
Yes, I have about 20 natives at the moment. It fluctuates from none to about 50, depending on the time of the year and the need. So mainly got little wombats and kangaroos and wallabies and quite a few birds, cockatoos and whatever needs help at the time.
How do you look after them all? Do you have help?
I have daughters, fortunately, that give me a big hand, and I have what we call a few foster mothers that help when there are often special little ones that are very tiny that need extra help. So, no, it's a bit of a team effort.
How much care do they need when they're young like this?
Well, when they first come in, they need 2 to 3 hourly feeds.
That's
mainly.
like having a baby, isn't it?
Yes, exactly the same. We have to be clean, have all the same things like bunny rugs and special bottles and teats for the babies. And so it's all day and all night as well if necessary. So just like new babies.
Do you get much sleep?
Oh, about 4 or 5 hours a night, maybe.
They must be quite disruptive in your household. Where do you keep them all?
Well, the little ones I keep in a nursery type room, and then as they get a bit older, they then come out into the family room. He's sucking his thumb, by the way.
Oh, look at that.
And
he's
a little upset.
A real baby.
But the wombats are a bit of brats. They chew the furniture and your ankles if you're not careful. They're a little bit naughty. But they're good fun.
And you've had one wombat for quite a while. He gets up to some mischief, doesn't he?
Yes, we did have, well, we've just released her actually, and she's had her for a couple of years, and she got the wanders and wandered out and walked about 20 kilometres into the next township and ended up in the local hotel. And
she needed a drink after the long walk.
I think she did. The poor people in there having a drink wondered what struck them. They thought they were having a little bit too much to drink. And then the policeman was called in from the local police station, and actually she chased him back to the police station, and she was then locked up in the cell overnight until they could find me to go and pick her up.
That's incredible. Well, they're certainly a handful, and it's a wonderful job you're doing, Claire. Thanks for coming in and showing us your animals and sharing that with us.
Glad to do it.
Now, would somebody like to hold this wombat for me? Just be careful of its claws. And speaking of cute and cuddly animals, and also speaking of wombats, we've got a book this week which talks about one of the wombat's relatives, and that's the koala. And it's a terrific book written by Denise Burt with photographs by Neil McLeod. And it's got some photographs of some very young koalas in here. When they're first born, they're only 19 millimetres long, and they're blind, hairless. And they stay in mum's pouch for quite a while, just like other marsupials. And here's one, it's only 2 months old. And the little one down the bottom
is 4 months old. It's got funny little sticking out ears like Mickey Mouse. And this little koala's a bit older, that's 5.5 months, and it's nearly ready to go off on its own, though it will stay on mum's back for quite a bit longer. And koalas make very good mums. In fact, their babies find it very hard to give them up. And here's a photo. This is fantastic. A rather big baby koala trying to have a piggyback on mum's back. Isn't that great? It's nearly as big as she is. That's published by J.M. Dent, and it's $12.95. It's marvellous if you love koalas. And we've got some letters this week. This one's from Jacob Smith, who comes from Eagleton in New South Wales, and he says he likes catching skinks, but he always lets them go, and he finds them under rocks and on brick walls. And he sent a photograph of himself with a kangaroo in the bush. Looks like a real bush boy there. And another letter from Nathan Kenzie, who comes from Waniassa in the ACT. And Nathan says, I love dinosaurs, and I've got lots of books about them, and love collecting plastic toy dinosaurs. And he sent us a photo of 2 boys. Let's see, that's Nathan and himself on a horse. And the other letter we have this week is from Camilla Zavatoro, who comes from Gladstone in Queensland. And she says that she loves Earthwatch. It's her favourite show. And her favourite animal is a grub. And she's drawn a picture of a grub, which she sends to us with all her TV love. Isn't it great? Hearts all around it. That's beautiful. Thanks very much, Camilla. And that's all on Earthwatching this week.
If you'd like to drop us a line here at Earthwatch, here's our address. And don't forget, if you happen to send us a photo along, make sure to include a second envelope so that we can return your photo to you afterwards.
Yeah, hi Claire. I've joined
Hi,
a little
David.
family circle here. You know, it's easy to see why people would want to look after and have animals in refuges, animals like wombats and possums and joeys. I mean, they're so cute and cuddly. I've got a bit of a penchant for the uglies, you know, the bats and the reptiles. Do you have any bats in your refuge?
Certainly do. We've had quite a few over the years, but they're all little animals.
Yeah.
Even the lizards, they all need help. They come in squashed by cars and that.
What about frogs?
Even had a frog.
Fantastic. Yes. I'm really happy now. Well, that's about all we've got time for this week.
Next week, we have a story about a doctor with a difference, and this one operates with a chainsaw.
So you better check that story out next week, and we'll see you then. But now it's time to say goodbye.
See you.
Bye.
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 Bye.